In the early 2000s, after the failure of Halloween Resurrection, Dimension had hired Jake Wade Wall to write a script for what was to be the next Halloween film. Now, this script and this film was not going to pick up after Resurrection. It had become clear at that time that the franchise needed to move forward in a different way. Now, obviously, we would end up getting that in 2007 with Rob Zombie's remake. But before the remake, the different approach that they were going to take was Jake Wade Wall's script, Halloween: The Missing Years. And this film would serve as a sequel and a prequel at the same time. The concept of The Missing Years was going to be to focus primarily on Michael's childhood in the asylum at Smith's Grove, learning things such as why he chose to wear a mask, why that specific mask, what happened in those years in between his original incarceration and his breakout, while also having flashes of modern day post-Halloween 2 where he has been re-incarcerated in Smith's Grove. So in ways it was going to serve as a Halloween 3. But Jake Wade Wall was going to keep Halloween 3 Season of the Witch canon. Now, canon in the sense of he wasn't going to ignore it. It wasn't like it didn't happen. This was almost going to lay the way for a Halloween 4 while also not ignoring everything that had been done before it. In an interview with Bloody Disgusting a couple years ago, Jake Wade Wall had this to say about his script. The concept was this: if Halloween's the night he came home, I started to think, wait a minute, yeah, okay, that's the night he came home. But his real home was the asylum. That's where he really grew up. So the concept of The Missing Years was to begin the film by exploring a bit of his childhood in the asylum and kind of fill in some pieces we didn't know about him. Like why specifically that mask, and just kind of fill in some of the fun lore that came specifically from that institution. So then the concept would be cut to the present day when Season of the Witch is unfolding. I never did address it specifically in that film, but I filled in that there was a missing year that he didn't come home. So where did he go? He went to Smith's Grove. He went to his real home. He was returning back to what was essentially the place he grew up during his formative years. It was basically going to be him wreaking havoc on the asylum. It was a lot of fun. I thought it was an interesting, fun way for the Halloween nerds like me to tie it all in and establish a new home for Mike. So Jake Wade Wall was clearly playing with focusing heavily on a prequel here and giving us a backstory into Michael Myers, but not the backstory we would initially end up getting in '07. This was going to be purely after his incarceration. We weren't going to see what made him tick, made him kill Judith, and got him to where he was in the first place. We were going to pick up where he's already there, we don't know why, and now we want to learn things about Michael, as much as we can, at least. But then he went on to say something that was really interesting and makes you kind of raise your eyebrows even more. When he was asked if it had been a success and been made, would there have been a plan for more follow-ups? And he said this: that was precisely what we continuously racked our brains over. Our school of thought was, oh, okay, we can now get 4 movies out of Michael Myers wreaking havoc in Smith's Grove. There was also talk of specifically ending Missing Years, where it completely lays the way for Halloween 4. There was talk to do it both ways. Since the script never got made, there's no way of knowing what would have been agreed upon. Now, as I said previously, the moments of this script that were going to take place in what was the present day then were going to address Halloween 2. All of that happened. He burned up in that hospital, but he somehow survived, and he was reincarcerated in Smith's Grove. Jake Wade Wall also said that Michael would have gotten his mask back in that forward jump. He would have gotten the iconic mask back, even though most of this movie was a prequel, simply because, as he said, it's too iconic not to. Another interesting thing about this script is that Dr. Loomis was set to return. Now, obviously, this was after Donald Pleasance had passed away, but presumably they would have to recast anyway because they were going to go back to Michael's childhood. And even if Donald was still alive, you weren't going to have Donald be able to play that role at that point in his life. So Dr. Loomis was in the script. Some other characters that were brought back in this script were Jimmy. Yes, Jimmy from Halloween 2. He was going to return. We also were going to see the return of Sheriff Lee Brackett. And I'm noticing a trend in a lot of these sequels. A lot of these sequels that never got made, Brackett was going to come back. Everybody has a fondness for Sheriff Brackett. I guess he finally got his day in Halloween Kills, whether you liked that role or not. Wall also mentioned that he was not going to include the Thorn trilogy mythology in this film, simply just the Thorn part of it, which wasn't introduced until Halloween 5, but wasn't expanded upon until Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers. He specifically said he did not want to get caught up in the weeds with that and trying to tie everything together. He wanted to simply focus on the first few movies and then get us to a time jump of where Michael is now, a la a modern Halloween 3, setting up Halloween 4. Wall goes on to talk about how he really wanted to get into Michael's head in this movie. He really wanted to see what took place in that asylum, what made him tick, what made him get to where he would end up going, and he was really excited to do that. He specifically does say one thing at the end of this interview that I think is interesting and would rub some fans the wrong way, especially back then when this hadn't been touched on whatsoever. He said he believes there were reasons why Michael was the way he was, and he wanted to explore those reasons. Now, in Halloween 2007, we would get a different backstory where Michael Myers was basically a product of his nurturing and his upbringing, and not so much his nature. A lot of fans were not too fond of that, nor was I. I enjoyed Rob Zombie's different approach, but I much prefer Michael Myers just being a motiveless serial killer that is essentially the embodiment of evil without reason. There is no reason why he does what he does. He just does it. When asked about why this movie never came to pass, Wall said that he cannot confirm this, but he had heard studio executives up top talking about how they wanted Rob Zombie to direct the next Halloween film, but this was before it was going to be a remake. He was their target to do the film. Maybe he was going to direct Jake Wade Wall's script. And then eventually the executive said, you know what, let's just do a remake. And I think Rob played into that too. I don't think he wanted to make a sequel tying up a bunch of loose ends from previous movies. He wanted a fresh start. The execs wanted a fresh start. So Jake Wade Wall's movie never came to pass. I have to imagine, though, that some of what we got in Halloween 2007, some of the backstory, some of the stuff in the sanitarium, was definitely inspired from Jake Wade Wall's script. I really do think so. Considering Dimension liked his script and they hired him, they saw his script and they were letting him tinker with it for almost 2 years, I think that was at the forefront of everybody's minds. And when they decided to do a remake, I think they incorporated some of the elements of a script that they liked into that remake. This is one of the more interesting unmade Halloween movies I've covered because there isn't much in this that I didn't like at all. I loved the idea of it being a true Halloween 3 while also keeping in continuity Halloween 4 and setting a roadmap for that. I loved the idea of getting some of the formative years of Michael Myers in the asylum, which I thought was really cool in Rob Zombie's Halloween. There was so much about this movie I liked. I also really enjoyed them keeping Halloween 3 Season of the Witch almost canon without directly calling it out. The missing night that Michael didn't come home was Halloween 3. I liked all of that. The only thing about it that I didn't love was hearing that he wanted to explain why Michael Myers was the way he was. Now, there could have been a really cool way to do that. Simply just driving home the point that he's just evil. Maybe that's the simple answer we would have gotten, and fans wouldn't have been up in arms over it. But we'll never know. Now, this script is online if you guys want to read it, and I suggest you do. I'm about halfway through it, and I'm really enjoying it myself. I think it's well written, and again, I think it brings a lot of new, fresh ideas into a franchise at that point that was on its last leg. So Dimension and the Akkads went the direction they went. They hired Rob Zombie, they gave us the remake, and Halloween: The Missing Years never came to pass. So we'll never know what made Michael tick in that asylum, why he specifically chose that mask. Did he have a reason? Or is he truly just purely and simply evil?